My name is Renee Forsyth. I'm the Director of Professional Development for Lyme Connect. And to provide a visual description, I am a white female with shoulder-length brown hair. I'm sitting in front of a lime green branded background, and I'm wearing, I think, an orange sweater today. So since we thought this topic was really so valuable and so important, we wanted to make this session available to everyone. So that means some of you joining us may not be familiar with Lyme Connect. So let me take a moment to tell you a little bit more about us. Lyme is a not-for-profit organization, and our mission is to rebrand disability through achievement. We do that by attracting high potential professionals and university students, including veterans, with all different types of disabilities into the Lyme network. Once an individual joins the Lyme network, we prepare them with the essential tools and confidence that helps them achieve their goals. That includes professional development resources and career coaching, just to name a few of our resources. We also connect our network members for scholarships, leadership programs, internships, and full-time careers with the world's leading corporations, our corporate partners. If you're joining us and you're not a member of the Lyme Connect network and you are a person with a disability, we encourage you to join the network. There is no fee to do so or to take advantage of any of our resources. And I know my colleague has put some information in the chat about how you can join us. For Lyme Connect, we also support our corporate partners in recruiting, onboarding, developing, retaining, and promoting all employees who have disabilities. And I know we have a number of corporate partners joining us today as well. Together with our network members and our corporate partners, we celebrate the strengths and talents of people with disabilities, which we know is the 2025 NDEAM theme, but it's a theme that we at Lyme Connect and our network members and corporate partners celebrate all the time. So just to highlight a few of our corporate partners, we're really proud of, not a few of our corporate partners, all of our corporate partners, we're really proud of our partnerships. And just to mention who we do partner with in North America, we partner with Johnson & Johnson, PwC, and Salesforce. Our US partners include Bloomberg, Citi, EY, Goldman Sachs, Google, NFL, Sony, and Unilever. In Canada, our partners include Bell, CIBC, Canada Life, Deloitte, IBM, OMERS, Rogers, and TD. And just to set the stage for the rest of the conversation, whether you're joining us from the US or Canada, we approach disability with the broad definition of it being a physical or mental condition that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And based on this definition, we know that approximately 61 million US adults and 8 million adults in Canada live with a disability, equating to 1 in 4 North Americans. And to further understand the impact of disability, statistics show that at least 1 in 5 university students has a disability, and we're starting to see that number continue to increase. And in the workplace, our research shows that approximately 1/3 of all white-collar corporate employees has a disability, so almost 30% of all white-collar corporate employees. So if you're joining us and looking around either in your workplace or in a university setting and feeling maybe alone in your disability, the statistics show that that's probably not the case, but it may be appearing that way because approximately 2/3 of all disabilities are non-visible or not apparent unless someone chooses to share that they live with a disability. That can include learning and attention issues, learning and attention disabilities, medical conditions, mental health conditions, and more. So now with that review of the disability landscape, I would like to take the next few moments or the rest of the presentation to talk about the NDEAM theme of celebrating your value and how it applies to you. We'll talk about disclosing your disability, talking about your disability, whether to do that, and then when might be the best time for you to talk about your disability, and some techniques for talking about your disability so that they set you up for success. And ultimately, we'll end with talking about how you can communicate your value. But luckily, I'm not doing this alone today. I am thrilled to have Dylan Taylor join me. And so, Dylan, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. And I will bring him in throughout the presentation to share a little bit about his personal experience. But Dylan, let's welcome you.
Thank you very much, Renee, and thanks to all of you for joining today. As a quick visual description, I am a white male with short black hair combed off to one side. I have a short brown beard, and I am wearing the bluest collared shirt that I own. As a little bit of background, I am a graduate of Middlebury College, which is a liberal arts college in Vermont. I graduated in 2024. And since then, I have been an analyst on the structured credit desk at Goldman Sachs. So we help large corporate clients that have unique sets of objectives and constraints access capital that they might not otherwise be able to access without our structured solutions. And I'll talk a little bit more about the finer points of my job as the presentation goes on. As a bit of personal background, I was born with a severe progressive hearing loss. I was diagnosed at 10 weeks, and I wore hearing aids for the first part of my life up until age 13, when my hearing dropped below the threshold where you are considered a candidate for a cochlear implant. So, in between eighth grade and my first year of high school, I took a year off from school to get a cochlear implant, relearn how to hear, and I've had my implant in my right ear for 11 or 12 years now. So what I'll be talking about in partnership with Renee and Lime throughout the rest of the presentation are the questions that we see on the screen right now. And the last thing that I should mention, of course, is I was a Lime Connect Fellow back in 2022, which is an in-person fellowship program for college sophomores, takes place in New York City. I still have a lot of people that I consider really, really close personal friends and a lot of professional connections from that program. So Renee, if you're going to talk more about that, you have my strongest endorsement. But with that, I'll toss it back to you.
Thanks, Dylan. We're so proud to have you as a fellow, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But next, moving on. So, how does this theme apply to me? If you're joining us, you may be joining us because you're interested in exploring how you can celebrate your value and talent as a person with a disability. So, I ask you this question: how has your disability shaped who you are? And throughout the presentation, you are welcome to share your experiences with the rest of the audience through the chat. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read all of the comments. I will continue to move through the presentation, but would be happy to have you all sharing a little bit in the chat and interacting together. When you think of how your disability shaped you, some of the things you may be thinking about are the limitations related to your disability. Some of that may come to mind, but I hope you also thought of some of the strengths, the unique strengths that your disability has shaped in you. In all of our work with our Lyme Network members, we consistently hear about how a disability has given people unique strengths as a result of living with their disability, not despite living with their disability. So on the screen, I have 6 examples of strengths. These may be some that you relate to, or you may have your own, but you definitely have them. And that's a first step in thinking about the unique value that you bring. So just to give you a few examples, you may be an incredible problem solver because you may have lived with your disability all your life and always had to figure out how to make an inaccessible world accessible for you. We have examples of venture capitalists that are related to and in the Lyme network who say they wouldn't trade their disability, their dyslexia for the world because it's made them uh, given them the unique strategic thinking skills that have made them so successful in their career. We have other examples of people who have taken leadership on campus to advocate for the rights of people with disabilities, or created ERGs in their company, or even just took a leadership role in advocating for their own medical conditions. And these are skills that are really transferable to the workplace. We have other people who talk about being incredibly organized because they always have to deliver ahead of time because they're not sure when their symptoms are going to flare up, but they always get the work done and ahead of time. Resilience and determination are words that came up over and over again, and just demonstrating the perseverance that comes from facing different challenges, overcoming them, and pushing to achieve and accomplish all of their dreams. So think about your own strengths and skills, and maybe some of these resonate, or maybe you have some different ones. We also know that people with disabilities possess specialized skills, which make them really effective in different roles. So that's another area to think about the value that you bring. Some examples include people with disabilities talking about how they were able to see patterns that they realized their peers weren't able to see. We had someone who is autistic, he mentioned that he was able to be aware of really small changes in the workflow process, which enabled him as an executive to develop more efficient systems. Other people shared examples of honing their listening skills because they're blind, for example, that made them really effective in mediation. Some people who mentioned having learning differences. So they always had to learn differently and be more curious and creative in the way they approached content. And so that made them really effective in asking different questions in the workplace that got to better solutions. We have great stories of managers who have demonstrated a unique empathy because they recognized that everyone on their team had different needs, and they were able to get the best out of their team as a result of attending to those different needs. Technology and accessibility, I've been at Lyme 10 years, and that's where I get amazed every day to see the advancements in technology that our network members contribute to, often because they've used technology as a way of making an inaccessible world accessible for them. And so having that voice and that perspective on accessibility is critical to all businesses. So again, think about your specialized skills that you've developed and may or may not be related to your disability. But just know that your perspective helps build businesses. So the research shows that if you have a member of your target audience on your team, that entire team is 144% more likely to understand that target audience. And so why is this important in the disability space? It's because you're an important voice of a consumer. We also know that disability touches either personally or through friends and family 73% of consumers. And globally, the buying power of this market, people with disabilities and their friends and family, equals almost $13 trillion. So understanding this consumer is important for business. So all of the skills and strengths that you bring into businesses is going to help companies build their business. So I think at that slide, let's hear from Dylan. If you want to tell us a little bit about some of the strengths and skills that you feel have helped you to be really successful.
Yeah, of course. I think it's such an important question, and it's one that I really started reflecting on when I got to college. I had lived with a disability my whole life, but up until then, I had never really reflected on how it has shaped my identity, my personality, my approach to work and school. And I think as I've gotten a little bit older, it's become easier to draw connections from the experiences related to disability that I had in my childhood to some of the strengths that I have today. And I think I can give, let's say, two examples here. The first is when I was in elementary and middle school, I went through about a decade of speech therapy to get to where I am today in order to talk. And, I didn't appreciate it when I was a child. But what that experience taught me is that effort compounds over time. And when you stick with something over a long time horizon, you can make a tremendous amount of progress. And that has translated into my approach to both college and my approach to work. Uh, in order to get a job in Goldman Sachs investment banking, you have to go through usually like say a 6 to 8 month networking process. And it's daunting and it's grueling and you need to put in a little bit of effort every day. I think I was more up to that task because of what I went through in my childhood, to give one example. And the second is for any of you who are deaf or hard of hearing or have hearing instruments, you know how easy they are to break and misplace. So when I was a child, I was falling into pools. My dogs were eating my hearing aids. I was misplacing them. And what that experience taught me is your actions have consequences. Grant, I think it was a very literal lesson to learn that if you're not responsible and you're not keeping up your organization of where your hearing aids are and how you're treating them, you literally don't get to hear until you go back to the doctor's office, you get a new set of hearing aids, right? So that taught me a lot of organization. It taught me resilience, of course, to Renee's point. And I think that is translated into my job here at Goldman. That understanding of a long time horizon and putting in effort combined with the organization and resilience and staying on top of things happens to be a very, very good blend to have in an investment banking analyst role at Goldman. And I think to tie all of this back into one line, one of the most important things for me personally has been to continually reflect and introspect on my relationship with my disability and how that is translated into strengths so that I can later on apply that to the job and really communicate my value, as we'll discuss, of course, later on in this presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Dylan. I would add a few other strengths, but we'll talk about those later. So moving on to the next session, here we have the question, should I disclose my disability? And spoiler alert, I am not going to answer that question. That is a really personal decision. And the way we approach it at Lyme Connect when we're coaching anyone around the disclosure decision is not a have to. It's going to really depend on the situation and your personal feelings about it. But we approach the disclosure decision in terms of whether, when, and how to disclose. So, you really, there's a lot that goes into that, and we do have a coach on staff that can walk you through that. But um, just to start, when we talk about whether to disclose or not, I'd ask you to think about what prevents you from disclosing your disability. And again, feel free to use the chat if you would like. Um, but I'm going to move on to just share some of the top reasons that people have told us that they choose not to disclose their disability. These are things that we've heard year after year. The belief that people will judge me before they know me, or that people will make assumptions about what I'm capable of. Other people have a fear of negative reactions or perceptions. Perhaps you've had an experience in your past where you talked about your disability and it didn't go well. That is often going to influence future decisions to talk about your disability. Certainly, as we talk about the workplace and the recruiting process, the concern that it will impact your career if you disclose either during the recruiting process or even on the job. Maybe that'll hold you back from getting the next big assignment. Or perhaps you don't know how to have the conversation. And that's one thing we will try to address during this presentation. And so those are some of the things to think about. It looks like some others of you have shared in the chat as well. And I'll also ask you if you've had any successes in disclosing. And I'm going to share some of the successes that we've heard from our network members, and these are actual quotes. This person said, my conversation resulted in getting the technology I need. I'm able to do my job better and faster. And we have some images here of someone using a smart pen. Maybe they recorded the meeting and then they're catching up on their notes after so that they could be fully present in the meeting. Another picture of an individual wearing noise canceling headphones. Some of these offices can be really busy and noisy, and maybe that just allows this person to really focus. And another person using excuse me, a screen reader. So again, the technology that they needed. Then we have some less technical or even less tangible accommodations that really helped this individual. Now, my manager has explicitly given me a code word to use whenever I'm having a bad day. So, this may be someone who's living with a chronic medical condition, for example, and they just needed this arrangement with their manager to know they needed a little extra support. And I love this quote, which talks about when I needed a flexible schedule for physical therapy. It could also be mental health therapy. I experienced empathy and understanding, which helped me reframe my view of disability. And I realized everyone, regardless of disability status, has their own needs in the workplace. And I think we've seen that over the last few years that especially with the pandemic and people having to work from home, everyone has needed different types of support to maintain their mental health, to accommodate their family, to maintain their productivity. So, really reframing and looking at accommodations as just another tool to help you be successful is why I really love this quote so much. So, Dylan, again, I'm bringing you back. What are your considerations when you talk about when you're thinking about disclosing your disability, and can you relate to any of the things that we just talked about?
Absolutely. I would say I can relate to all of them. And the first thing that I would say is disclosure is something that is deeply personal and it takes practice. I remember I've been practicing since I was a child. For example, I remember in fourth grade, I was entered into a spelling bee. And I needed to tell the moderators that I might have difficulty hearing the words that you're saying. I also tried to tell them it would be really helpful if you could spell out the word for me, and they said, "Don't think we can do that." But nowadays, I've had a few successes and failures. I'll start with a failure. When I was going through the Goldman Sachs recruiting process, I was getting to the end near the super day or the final round interview, and I was going back and forth in my head thinking, should I disclose? Should I not disclose? And ultimately, I decided to not disclose before my interview started. And this was back in, say, 2021 or 2022. So we were still coming out of the pandemic. All of the interviews were virtual. So my interview was in a Zoom room with one of the managing directors at Goldman Sachs. And there was a glitch with his Zoom where his audio was decoupled from his lips. So I couldn't really lip read. And he also had an accent that I wasn't familiar with. So I wasn't able to understand him. And I had to disclose essentially in the middle of the interview, I'm deaf and I can't understand you that well. Thankfully, he was very understanding and accommodative, and it, of course, didn't impact my chances of getting into Goldman. But that is some of a cautionary tale that I tend to bring up nowadays. And later on into my time at Goldman, this past summer, I was responsible for overseeing three interns, and I was putting myself in their shoes and thinking, if I was an intern at Goldman and my immediate superior on whom I need to make a positive impression in order to get a return offer or full-time job, if he was deaf and I didn't understand how to best work with him, I would be really, really nervous and I wouldn't be able to bring my best self to work. So with them, I decided to disclose immediately. Like midway through the first day, I told them, you might have noticed that I wear a cochlear implant in my right ear and a hearing aid in my left ear, and I take these out occasionally during the day. During your internship, you should feel comfortable to ask as many questions as you have. You can always tap me on the shoulder and I'll put my hearing devices back in. And as long as we're speaking face to face and I can see your lips, we won't have any issues with communication. So that direct approach is something that I consider a success. And as I think more about my overall philosophy when it comes to disclosing nowadays, I think it boils down to I tend to disclose if it would be a disservice to myself or to others to not disclose. And what I mean by that is if I go into a Starbucks and I order a coffee, I'm not going to start off my order by saying, we just need to lay this out right now. I am deaf and I have been since birth, and I need this in the back of your mind while we're making this Americano. Like that's not necessary. If I don't tell her that, I'm not doing a disservice to myself and I'm not doing a disservice to her. But in this scenario where I'm directly managing people and they're meeting me for the first time, I think it would be more uncomfortable for them and we wouldn't be able to communicate as effectively as we might be able to if I had disclosed. So in that scenario, I would make the choice to disclose. But ultimately, it's a very personal decision. It takes practice, it takes reflection, and it's ultimately up to you.
Thank you, Dylan. And I love that you covered every aspect of it. So managing other people, going through the recruiting process, and just in your everyday life. I think that was amazingly helpful. So thank you for that. So moving on to the next stage of the disclosure decision is if you decide to disclose, when is the best time to talk about your disability? Again, there's no blanket answer for this, but we'll talk about some of the touch points when it might be helpful for you to disclose. I think there's some mention of it in the Q&A or the chats. So there's different potential touch points, and I'm going to walk through each one of these that's on this screen, starting with the application process. So you may be making the decision as you're checking that box, whether to disclose or not, and whether to self-ID as a person with a disability. I can tell you generally from our large corporate partners that that information is generally kept separate. It's really a data point, that self-ID form. It's not something that follows your application and is known to anybody who's making a hiring decision. It's really a data collection. I can't say that that's true if you're talking about a small little company, but I generally that is the goal with the self-ID form. So that was one of the questions in the Q&A. If you are applying to a Lime Connect partner, if you are already a network member, if you're planning on joining and becoming a network member, that is our something that we want to know. We have a form. We ask you to notify us because we want to support your candidacy. We want to support your application with our corporate partners. That amazing list of partners that you saw, they are partnering with us because they want to get to know you. They are committed to hiring and supporting people with disabilities. So those are two things related to the application process. You also may just really have a strong sense of identity around your disability. So perhaps it's on your resume and you want to share that openly. But certainly we want to know if you're applying to a corporate partner. You may decide to disclose prior to the interview. If you know what the interview is all about, you might determine that you need extra time. You need to request extra time to complete a case study. Or maybe you're taking a coding challenge and you would like to use your own device, which is in some cases may be an accommodation. Perhaps they want to do a phone interview and you really need to read lips. And so you prefer to have a video interview. Those are all things you would want to request in advance of the interview. It might also come up during the interview. It might just be something that we talked about strengths and skills earlier, that you want to highlight as something that is a great accomplishment for you, or that has led to a unique skill that you've developed. And that may not request an accommodation. It just may be something that you want to share as part of the process. Perhaps you have, as Dylan shared, maybe in an uncomfortable situation where you were counting on reading lips, or maybe you're blind and you can sense that the recruiter is a little uncomfortable with that because they didn't know that. And you really want to just address it so that you can spend the rest of your time focused on talking about why you're such a good fit for the role. Somebody asked, should I wait until after I receive an offer? That is common that people, if they don't need an accommodation during the recruiting process, they'll wait till they receive the offer because they feel a little bit more secure in asking at that time. Maybe they understand the role a little bit better. I would encourage you to ask in advance of starting so that you can hit the ground running when you do start. If you're joining us and you're thinking about an internship, sometimes those internships are granted or decided upon a year in advance. So don't wait until the day before you're about to start to have those conversations. It does take time in some cases to get accommodations in place, and you want to be ready to do your best work. Even if you haven't disclosed, up until that point, throughout the whole recruiting process, you can disclose once you're employed at any point. Perhaps your symptoms are increasing. Perhaps it's a newly acquired disability. Maybe your needs change in the workplace if your role changed. Or, an ideal situation is that you're feeling more comfortable. You trust your manager and you know that you could do better work or be more productive if you had a certain accommodation. So that may be a time. Obviously, we talked about it's a personal decision and you may choose not to disclose, and that's okay if that works for you. I would just question yourself and think, if I had certain accommodations or tools in place, could I be more productive? Am I holding myself back? Are my managers making assumptions about me or about my capabilities because they don't know that I have a disability? They don't understand why I might approach things in a different way. And then just personally and emotionally, is it taking a toll that you're masking your disability um, in the workplace? So just some things to think about. So I'm going to roll through this next section and then we'll bring Dylan back in to talk a little bit about his experience. But let's talk about what some techniques are for talking about your disability. We approach it in terms of sort of 4 steps, them being: establish the reason for the conversation based on what your needs are, identify the best person for the conversation, simplify your disability, share the advantages or limitations, make the ask, problem solve, be part of the solution process, because you know what works best for you. So first off, think about the reason for the conversation. If you've decided to disclose, is it just something that you want people to know on your team? Do you feel like it's not something you want to mask, or maybe you have a disability that you want them to know about, that in case anything happens, but they don't need to do anything in that moment. Maybe clarify ways to interact, as Dylan did with his interns. Or perhaps you do need an accommodation, or you need a disability related need. You have a disability related need that you are looking to get met in that particular situation. Perhaps you just really want to own your own story and you don't want people making assumptions about you. And so you want to raise awareness around your experience with your disability. And always bring it back to your strengths. That's a very much an approach that we take at Lyme Connect, that you always want to reiterate the strengths you have as an employer, as a candidate. So talking about some techniques, we'll go through these fairly quickly, but first of all, you might want to simplify the science. We'll give you some examples about how you might want to try out the metaphor exercise and see if that works for you. Whatever technique you use, you really only need to share what is relevant to the discussion. So you may have lived with your disability for much of your life or have a lot of medical background and knowledge about it. That's not something that's necessarily needed in any conversation, to share all of that history or background or origin of your disability. You really only need to share the information that helps the person understand what your needs are and how they can support you. Again, we highlight your strengths. And just to say, I think Dylan talked about practicing when you're not in the situation, can really be helpful to give you a sense of comfort and walk through it. So you can do that with a friend, you can do that with a career coach. We have a great career coach on staff, so you can try that out with somebody before you go into that scenario. So simplifying the science, it could be, I had an example recently where someone talked about their unique brain. She said that due to her disability, sometimes she mixes up words, but she goes on to explain the strategies she uses to help her communicate effectively. You may also want to show a support tool. Maybe you use a screen reader, or maybe there's some other tool that helps you manage your time. Whatever it might be, that can be helpful in the other person understanding what your needs are. And then there's an exercise that we use at Lyme Connect, which some people like, some people don't. But here's some examples of using a metaphor to describe your disability. Someone who's blind or low vision, and these are actual examples, explained it as: my sight is like if you put both thumbs in front of your eyes and tried to see around them. Another person who talked about their hearing loss, as it's like being at a rock concert where you can hear the voices but can't make out the words. Someone who is autistic says it's like when you get a text from someone who doesn't use emojis, so you don't know how they meant to say what they said, how to read it, or how they felt. And another person who lives with diabetes, a chronic illness, said that managing my diabetes is like sailing. It may look like smooth sailing, but I am constantly adjusting the sails to ensure I stay on course. So, those are some examples. If you have a metaphor that you want to share, we'd love to see it in the chat. And then finally, just remembering that accommodations, as we talked about, are a tool for success. So, studies show that 59% of accommodations cost nothing to provide. It might be an adjusted schedule or it might be a different way of working. And most accommodations cost less than $500. So, if you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't want to put this burden on my employer, generally it's not something that's going to be a big expense. And we know that employers are accommodating people for a variety of different reasons, including family commitments, other considerations, just other needs that people have in the workplace that they need accommodated to be able to be their most successful and productive. So, Dylan, back to you. Let's talk about some of the approaches you've taken to disclosing, techniques, any accommodations that you want to touch on.
Yeah, of course. I'll say firstly that there we go. I've used accommodations throughout my whole life. When I was in elementary school, I had an FM system which directed the teacher's voice directly to my hearing aids. When I was in college, I had extended time on exams. Now that I'm here at Goldman Sachs, I have in front of me right now my own audio setup that takes voices from the phone and from Zoom and transmits it directly to my cochlear implant. So to echo Renee's point, never feel like you don't deserve accommodations, regardless of how expensive they are. And usually they're not all that expensive. Now, regarding the approach to disclosing, I think what I try to do is remember two things. The first of which is people are generally well meaning but clueless. And what I mean by that, I'll take myself as an example. I have a good friend who works in investment banking here at Goldman, and he's blind. And I have no idea how he does his job on a day to day basis. Like, I could not even ballpark it, the tools that he uses. And I think I'd imagine that's likely the same for a lot of us on this Zoom call. And of course, a lot of my colleagues here at Goldman. Like, if I ask them, how do you think I do my job on a day to day basis? Like, how do I take phone calls? How do I take Zoom calls? How do I make sure I don't miss my alarm in the morning? There's generally a lot of information asymmetry between what we know about ourselves and what other people understand about our day to day. And this is, I think, where Renee's point is so important, that you're in a position where you should share the amount of information that is relevant for the other person to work effectively with you. And I'll discuss what that means for myself in a second. But the second thing I think about, and this is something that I think often goes quite understated, is that you don't need to have all of the answers and you don't need to answer all the questions related to your disability. Right? I'm almost 24 years old. I'm still learning new things about how to best manage my deafness and how to best be the best possible version of myself on a day-to-day basis. And I still don't have all the answers, let alone be able to communicate all the answers. So I'd say relieve yourself of that burden, like feeling that you need to answer everything and know everything about your condition. So when I disclose, I generally make sure I tell people three things. The first is keep your lips visible when you're talking to me, because that ensures that we can communicate most effectively. The second is I will often take my hearing aids out when I need to focus. And if you urgently need to tell me something, just tap me on the shoulder and I can put them back in. And the third, and maybe most important, is I will let you know if I'm ever having any issues that impede my work. And what this does is it places a responsibility and the control back onto me to speak up when I'm having issues. So the other person doesn't need to be constantly worrying about, have I given him everything that he needs to be successful? Is there anything more that I can be doing? So with that, Renee, I'll toss it back to you.
Thanks, Dylan. Amazing. And we only have a few more slides, and I know there's some questions in there. So we'll try to get to those. Sorry. So the last point that we said we were going to talk about is how can I communicate my value? So hopefully over the last 40 minutes or so, we've given you some things to think about, and it really does come back to your unique strengths and skills and how to position yourself with those skills, not necessarily focused on disability or needing to talk about your disability, but really demonstrating your value in the workplace and all that you uniquely bring to any particular role, whether in the recruiting process or in on the job. So think about those, and also remember that research shows that hiring people with disabilities it really drives success. So studies show that those companies that hire people with disabilities make accessibility a business imperative, and they realized a 28% higher revenue, doubled their net income. They see 30% higher profit margins and huge advancements in innovation. And I don't know about everybody's profit margins and all of that, but what I can say from seeing our network members and the innovation that they are able to drive in the different businesses, corporate partners, and other companies is truly incredible. So just keep those things in mind as you're going into, or you're either on the job or looking for a job, that this is incredible value, that you're going to help that business be successful, and really look at those unique skills that you bring. So I'm going to give Dylan the floor again. That's our last slide. So I'm going to stop sharing because I'd really like him to take a moment to talk about how he demonstrates his value and communicates that. So Dylan, over to you.
Thank you. I think when it comes to communicating our value, it's to me similar to a job interview, where first it's best done through a lot of self-reflection and introspection, where if we have the best understanding of our own strengths and how those strengths have been informed by the experiences in our life, then we're putting us in the best possible position to communicate them. And then I think the second prong there is often quite effective, along with explicitly communicating your value, to implicitly let your performance speak for yourself. And what I mean by that is if you imagine you're in a job interview and you want to demonstrate that you're an effective communicator, it's likely going to be better that instead of going out and saying, I'm a really good communicator, like when I am working for you, you will see just how good I am. It's probably more effective to, throughout the course of the interview, speak in a polished, structured way, answer the questions precisely, right? Taking all of the strengths that you've acquired to your life and then applying them to the task at hand. And then what I've found has happened over time here at Goldman and in college and other settings that I've been involved in is people can kind of glean their own conclusions over time. Like, for example, I personally think one reason that I enjoyed public speaking is because I practiced speaking so much throughout my life. Again, 10 years of speech therapy, and now I want to apply it whenever I can in my day to day. And sometimes I wonder, of course, I haven't explicitly told a lot of people that, but over time, as people have gotten to know me, I'm sure that they've started making connections between some of the experiences I've likely had in my life and what I'm able to bring to the job. So with that, Renee, I'll toss it back to you if we're doing Q&A or if we have any additional remarks.
Yes. Yes. So I'm looking, thank you for that, Dylan. I'm looking at the Q&A and the chat. There's a lot going on in that. Thank you for those of you who shared your metaphors. That's really interesting to see. I'll pick up a few questions. We may not get to everything. Someone asked, I have gaps in my resume due to disability flare-up or medical procedures. How do I explain a gap in my resume is not due to laziness, vacation, failed applications? Recruiters may reject my application before I have an interview chance to explain myself. Um, there's definitely a couple things you can do, and you can certainly make a coaching appointment to go deeper into your particular situation. But you can, in some cases on applications, there is an area to explain different circumstances. So you may want to take that moment, again, not to get into great detail, but just to say you needed to take a leave because you had a medical condition and now you're ready to return to the workplace. You can also, on your resume, find other ways to phrase things that you've been doing. Maybe you have taken, maybe you've done some volunteer work while you were not working full time, or maybe you've taken some certifications, anything like that that you can indicate on your resume to kind of fill that gap. But also keep in mind that people take gaps for a number of different reasons. I had a gap in my resume to take care of children and stay home. So there's a number of different reasons people take sabbaticals, different things like that. So definitely, try to address it so you don't get that immediate rejection. I understand what you're saying here. You're getting that before you even have a chance to explain it. So those are some tips to address that. I'm trying to. Uh, there's a lot of questions about, can Lyme Connect help us with some of the work that we're doing? And certainly that is possible. So get connected, make sure you're reading our emails, make sure you're seeing. Someone mentioned that they weren't aware of virtual opportunities. We have a number, whether you're in the US and Canada, we have a number of different virtual recruiting events. They're really great events, and you get an opportunity to connect with our different corporate partners through those events. So I encourage you to log in and take advantage of those. We have some coming up in October. I don't know, Dylan, if you see anything you want to answer, let me know. I'm trying to read it all quickly. Uh, okay, what about this is an interesting question. What about disability visibility and disclosure in an AI interview? I've been hesitant to do an interview through AI for a remote job. I assume you're saying like a recorded interview. That's what I assume you mean by the AI interview. And generally, if you feel like it's something that's going to impact your performance in the recorded interview, then you may want to request an accommodation, or at the very least, let the individual know, or let the recruiter know what they might be seeing. Again, not in too much detail, but if you feel like it's going to, I think that's what it often comes down to. If you feel like it's going to negatively impact you in the recruiting process, then it's probably worth it to at least put the message out there. If you feel like you're getting rejected and that might be why, then it's worth it to explore how you can communicate this um, to someone. And often what I didn't cover in the presentation is determining who to disclose to. That's because that's very difficult. It really depends on what your scenario is. I do know in the recruiting process, it can be very difficult because it is only usually a general email box that you're sending the information to. So I know that's probably the biggest challenge, and it's often what I'm telling our corporate partners. Make sure you're responding to that in a very timely manner, because that's really challenging. Um, Okay. I know there's a number of questions about the return to the office, and I know that's a really a hot topic. So there are roles out there that are hybrid. There are roles out there that are remote. In terms of the legality of requesting to work from home, that's not something I'm equipped to answer. We're not legal experts here at Lyme Connect. But I know that that's something that companies across the board are dealing with and trying to address. So I'm sorry I don't have the answer for you on that, but I would say that someone said, should you bring it up in an interview if that's something that you need? Um, Possibly, possibly if you know absolutely that you're not coming into the office, it probably does make sense to have that conversation on the earlier side of the process rather than deliver that at the end so you're not wasting your time or their time. Dylan, I'm going to toss this one over to you. Do you recommend joining disability focused groups? Uh, yeah, I employ resource groups for career growth and networking. I'm considering applying for leadership communication roles, but I'm concerned about time commitment due to inconsistent flares despite my genuine interest.
Absolutely. I think the first thing that I would speak to here is the value of community and engaging with the network. So here at Goldman, at least, we have a disability affinity network that I'm a part of and that I've met so many incredible people during. And these people have both broadened my horizon and deepened my understanding of my relationship with my disability, especially in a corporate setting. So to the extent that you have the opportunity to join resource groups or networks such as Lime, I would very, very strongly advocate for that. And I think beyond that, speaking on the time commitment part, I personally can't speak to flare-ups in disability and how that may affect time commitment. But I can speak to having a job that takes a bit of a toll, very long hours and a lot of time constraints each week. And I think it's very important to have certain balance in your life. And one way that I balance the demands of my job at Goldman is I try to stay connected to the community and I try to quote unquote volunteer a little bit where I can. And of course, Lime has given me a fantastic opportunity to stay involved. So I think for both the purposes of deepening relationships and also giving a bit of a counterbalance to what we might be doing more in our day-to-day jobs, I would strongly advocate for joining any groups or any networks that you have the opportunity to join. Renee, not sure if you would have anything to add there.
No, I think that is an amazing answer. We are really excited with the ERGs and the efforts that we see at our corporate partners. And I think one of the things we really like to build at Lime Connect is community. And that's one of the things that Dylan, well, I'm speaking for you, but we try to facilitate through our fellowship program is the community of people who may have different disabilities, but who have the lived experience of having a disability. So community can be really valuable in helping you navigate the workplace with a disability. And so yeah, big fan of an ERG. And if you don't have one where you work, start one. That's another amazing thing that we've seen a number of our network members do as well. Okay, so I think we covered a lot of the critical questions. A couple people asked, how can I pursue an opportunity at Goldman Sachs in particular? Dylan, I guess you sold it really well. Goldman is one of Lime Connect's corporate partners in the US. So join the network, check out all of the job postings for all of our corporate partners are in our community platform. So we encourage you to go in and check those out and apply. And if you apply, be sure to fill out the notify us form so we can support your application. I think when we send out the follow-up information, we can also let you know about the recruiting events or networking events that we have coming up in the next few weeks and encourage you to join those as well. We have some additional webinars throughout the month of October, and we also will have some more information coming your way. So for Voices of Lyme session in November. So we're always trying to put out new content based on what the needs are of our network members. So um, I want to just say a huge thank you to Dylan. The recording, yes, is the recording available? Yes, we will send out a link to the recording. Just give us a little time to get it edited and up on YouTube, and you will receive an email from us. So you will have access to this recording. We don't send out our slides, but you will have access to the recording. And go back to my thank you. Dylan, thank you so much for joining us. If anyone's a university student, we do have some programs open right now. Our first year program, our discovery program, our fellowship application, of which Dylan is a part, will be opening probably in the next month or so. So stay tuned for that. You'll see it in our newsletters. And we're just thrilled that so many of you can join us and be so active in the chat. Great information. Dylan, any last words before we close out?
Now, I just want to say thank you for having me on, and thank you to all of you who were able to join. I think it's really important that we all continue having conversations and connecting with regard to disability. So again, a big thank you to Lime for making that possible, and a big thank you to all of you for joining and participating.
Awesome. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, everyone who attended. And enjoy the rest of Disability Employment Awareness Month. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Take care.